Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry reading series called Poets Corner in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them for an hour or so around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Rae White, who will read poems and talk on the theme of unruly poems, ones that defy convention through structure, language, and themes. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Rae is recording from Brisbane or Meanjin in Queensland. I would like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Jagera and Turrbal people, the traditional custodians of the land in Meanjin, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. Rae White is a non-binary transgender writer, educator, and zine maker. Their poetry collection, Milk Teeth, University of Queensland Press 2018, won the 2017 Arts Queensland Thomas Shapcott Poetry Prize, was shortlisted for the 2019 Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, and commended in the 2018 Anne Elder Award. Rae's poetry has been published in Australian Poetry Journal, Cordite Poetry Review, Meanjin Quarterly, Overland, Rabbit, and others. Rae is the editor of End by Life, a journal for non-binary and gender-diverse creatives. They are the events and marketing manager at Queensland Poetry. Rae's second poetry collection, Exactly As I Am, which I have in my hot little hands, is out now through University of Queensland Press. Hi, Rae, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I was going to say, I actually have glasses that are the same color. I should have matched it. Should have matched the cover, but no, it's absolutely lovely to be chatting to you today.
Very timely, given the book's just come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to start, obviously, with your theme, unruly poems, ones that defy convention through structure, language, and themes, and ask you first to explain what you mean by convention in this context.
Oh, interesting. Just hard-hitting question first. I think in terms of, I guess, what we see as something that is a structure that is given or that is considered quote unquote normal, considered something that doesn't need dismantling in this instance. And I think there's a lot in poetry that can be dismantled and rebelled against in the best possible way, in a playful way. So I do enjoy defying poetry convention, in that way. No shade to, more conventional poetry, though. All poetry.
Yeah. Well, purists might have poetry be about the rules of the conventions, but there is a long history in poetry of breaking the rules, of defying the conventions, and pushing language and form and structure as far as they can possibly be pushed. So in that context,
yes.
Do you think that defying convention has itself become a convention?
I think that perhaps it has, especially when I am applying for grants and things, there is this idea of continuously, pushing yourself and doing something new and something innovative. And, perhaps that is in and of itself, become, some kind of convention, some kind of trope, because, I don't really think that any kind of poem really does. I mean, I think some poems say something new, but is it just maybe saying the same thing in a different way? I don't know. So very good.
Anything goes,
Yeah. And look, I do like what you said before, because I think that a bit earlier in terms of, poetry, how it is that kind of sense of play. And I do love that about poetry, because it feels like kind of every blank page is almost a sandbox that you can play with and like, have fun with, and really, do something different and do something a little bit, unruly,
Well,
as I said. So depending on what you want,
It's very interesting that you should say that, because Rae, the first poem you're going to read in a little bit, my first question about that was about play. So we'll get to that in a minute. But I wanted to ask you first a couple more questions on the theme.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on what interests you in defying convention?
Oh, I think it is, once again, that kind of sense of play, and that I enjoy playing with words. I enjoy kind of, seeing how my brain kind of can collaborate with, a blank page or whatever it is that I'm doing. Like if I'm creating a poem, there's like a bitsy game or something. And I do kind of, enjoy that kind of aspect of it. So I think that's why I do it, is basically just because I thoroughly enjoy it. And I think, in terms of, poems being unruly and defying convention, it is something that, as a trans person, it would be interesting and extremely perhaps ironic for me to write within, a certain maybe conventional poetry structure. I think that would be, quite fascinating. And I'm sure there's a lot of amazing poets who've done that. I kind of like transing poems, I guess. It's like, if being trans is defying convention, then why not write poetry that also does that?
That makes sense. I also wonder whether it's a generational thing, like, what's gone before has gone before, and now it's time to shake it up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, poems that I read, when I was sort of in school and stuff were, just poems that I personally couldn't, relate to. I learned a lot from them, but they were just sort of something that I thought, oh, what if I wrote something different than this? And then, now sort of like in my 30s, I'm like, yes, I can write something that is, and I see other people doing it as well. There's an incredible amount of poets experimenting with word, with voice, with digital poems and things. So I think it is like, it's poetry. It's the poetry timeline, perhaps.
It'd be interesting to see how that whether that changes as you get older and as the next generation comes along to challenge what you're doing.
Which I embrace that wholeheartedly. Yeah. I think about that a lot, actually, and especially in terms of the words that I use as well. Like, will we be using the words transgender and non-binary? Will the word poem actually suit a poem, or will we be using an entirely different word or definition, in 10, 20 years time? So no, completely. I love that. Bring it on.
Yeah. All right, we'll bring on a poem.
I love it. All right. This first one is called "What Have You Done?" I'm windowsill watchful as they scuttle to pack suitcases, boxes, green bags, duffels, all spilling over warmly like waterfalls. We could do with the rain. Sky hazes red with thick-brimmed clouds as their breathing hardens and hastens, running from car to door and back again. Forearm lengths of forehead sweat, wiped and flicked to floor. Sharpened sunlight folds through my window and bathes my leaves orange. What is leaving when you're simply left behind? Because just like that, no more bags. We forgot the plant, someone shouts over sirens. Door ajar for a second's hesitation before, leave it, just leave it. It'll fend for itself. Thank you.
So there I was thinking about play and poetry, and not just playing with conventional language and with voice and perspective. And you've mentioned play. How important is play for you in your poetry?
Oh, I mean, definitely, yeah. as you heard from my previous answers, definitely something that's incredibly important. I think that, you know, as adults, we often kind of lose that sense of play, and perhaps that, you know, poetry is something that, you know, should be taken seriously. Yeah, I'm like, nah, not at all. So no, I think that it's something that's incredibly important, because I love embracing, you know, that sense of joy and that sense of wonder, and sort of putting myself in the shoes, or I guess in this case, the roots of a plant in terms of perspective. And yeah, no, play is something that is, I think it's something that is quite key to the way that I view the world and the way that I write poetry. And, you know, not just in terms of, you know, I guess in this case, perspective, and there's a little bit of form that's played with. The poem opposite it is has an incredible sense of play.
Yes, I was that.
Yeah.
I thought, is this a mistake? Oh, no, it's not. It's the poem.
Oh, I know, right? It's fantastic. For context for listeners, it includes Zalgo text, which is kind of this glitchy text that does look kind of like an error. So no, I thoroughly enjoy messing about with things. I think because it sort of lets your guard down as well, and you're left with perhaps something that you weren't expecting to write, which is always interesting.
I mean, it actually leads into my next question, because very often when there's play in a poem, the poem is operating on more than one level, and there's a level beneath the play where something else is going on that is more serious. So the next question is, how important for you is that more serious level behind the play?
Oh, I mean, equal to play. Yeah, I definitely am always sort of often the, you know, that more serious level is you know, metaphorical, or, you know, might be sort of not necessarily as obvious, but it's definitely something that's, you know, quite important, especially when I'm talking you know, about gender, or in this case, you know, I'm talking about the bushfires. And, you know, I've got poems in here about various other things to do with climate change and the environment. And it's something that I kind of enjoy, the interesting juxtaposition, you know, between sort of playfulness and maybe sort of light bit of humor and sarcasm, and that sort of more serious tone.
I mean, this technique of taking the perspective of something else, in this case, a pot plant, takes out the poetic I, which can be so many poets, and can be such a burden, really. Do you feel a sense of liberation when you write something from, say, the perspective of a pot plant?
Most definitely, yeah. I love this kind of concept, because I feel like a lot of my poetry is sort of a mix of truth and untruth. Like, it's about me, but it's never actually about me, but it also is absolutely about me. So it's kind of this mix of nonfiction and fiction. And so, you know, this poem is obviously from me, the I, as in my imagination, a thing that I thought, but it is absolutely about a pot plant. And there's a lot of other poems in here that are, you know, about me as a trans person, but then they're also, you know, there is fiction to the nonfiction. And I think it does take out that burden. I'm not sure if it's because, like, part of, like, my little devil in my head goes, well, it's because you're just not brave enough to use the I. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think I just enjoy messing about with perspective, and also sort of, I guess, messing about with, you know, the audience and what they're going to read and how they're going to read something, whether or not they can take something from it, whether or not they go, oh yeah, that's definitely about Rae. I definitely, that's about them. Or, you know, whether or not they take something else away from it. So yeah, no, I really like that question.
Yeah, well, look, I come from the opposite angle actually, because I
Mm.
I had trouble getting rid of the I. I was stuck with
Oh,
my I
yeah.
for so long, you know. It was just so nice finally to learn to get away from it. Um,
Let it free.
Let it go. Yeah, that's right. Now, the title of this poem, "What Have You Done,"
Mm.
is an admonishment. And
Mm.
I'm wondering what it is an admonishment about. I mean, we all forget things and leave things behind. What is this poem saying about that?
Mm. Yeah, I definitely think it's sort of asking people to look at what they've done or what they haven't done in terms of their action or their inaction towards climate change. And obviously, it's something that our governments continuously are also not doing a lot about. So it's definitely a little hat tip to them, asking what have you done or what have you in fact not done. So I'm hoping it's something that people read and go, yeah, what am I doing actually? Like how can I make a change? They might not though, that's okay too. But the more little changes we make, the less things will become extremely hot.
We hope.
Yeah, we fingers crossed.
One more question about this poem. I feel the rush in the scuttling and the running, and I was wondering if this poem is a commentary on our rush to the next destination, and the preoccupation that stops us often from inhabiting the moment.
Oh, look, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, definitely. I think there is this, especially with our lives being so busy and, especially during sort of lockdowns, there was always this, I guess, more sense of on the go Zoom meeting. Oh, look, I'm working from home, so I can check my email when I'm, basically, just before I go to bed, maybe even check my email when I'm sleeping. No holidays for me. So it's kind of, I do feel like there is this, I guess, capitalist, enthusiasm for rushing, for continuously scuttling about the place and not necessarily noticing things like that last plant that you forgot.
Yeah. I think it's become a bit of a habit and it's hard to break.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we can break it by writing poetry and reading poems. Would you like to read another one?
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think that's one of the key things. It's definitely how I break it. I say that and I haven't written a poem in a little while, but that's okay.
Same.
Yeah, it's a big mood. All right, this one is called Don't Feed. Don't feed. Don't feed. Turns out Maggie's like schmackos. If their black, white feathers look bedraggled and spent, chances are they're old and without teeth. So halve flat, egg-shaped treat and throw it directly in open beak. Like a bard, they'll thank you with repetitive song. Turns out one Maggie brings many. Soon you'll have a baker's dozen basking on the bitumen at your feet. Don't be alarmed when the 13th is a crow. I think that's lucky, perhaps. Anything is lucky in years like this. If birds are alive and you're outside, count yourself. Count your teeth behind your mask and ask yourself, how many teeth is the right amount? How many is too many? Turns out birds don't have teeth, but their beaks and swoops are just as sharp. Fling all the schmackos in their direction as diversion and run. Government guidelines state masks must be worn during exercise and hasty escapes. You don't know which this is, but you do know sweat crawls against your spine and your muggy breath wheezes up your nose. Turns out you should have read the new sign. Things have changed round here. Turns out beaks aren't just for swallowing schmackos or seed or skin or sinew, scapula or scalp. Turns out, no matter your fitness or kindness, you can't outrun the birds, the birds, the birds.
Okay, so I'm reading this poem and I'm looking for Tiffany Hedren. I'm saying, is this poem a homage to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds?
Look, it's not, but it absolutely could be. It's just my strange little imagination. I did actually feed one sad looking magpie and then ended up with quite a crowd that was enthusiastic for the food, and hence the poem.
Hence the poem. Now, I love the repetition of the phrase "turns out" in this poem. It's a phrase that challenges preconceived notions and our many sort of daily assumptions. Turns out things are often not what they seem. Is one of the objectives of this poem to make us conscious of and to question those notions and assumptions?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my main aim is to kind of, I guess with this poem, look at, so sorry, I'm so tired. I might have to edit this out. All right, we're back. It's been a day. Yeah, I definitely think it's a poem that I want to get people to question their assumptions and question, what might happen next in terms of, lockdown was something that we never really expected, perhaps. And, if lockdown had continued, would the birds have taken over? Which is obviously, something that I say, well, that's silly. That never could have happened. But what if it did? So
it's a what if sort of poem.
It's definitely a what if sort of poem. And, I do like me some post-apocalyptic kind of vibes.
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's something ominous in the poem. And it's a shifting of balance in the relationship between people and birds, where birds become ascendant almost. And you point to this when you say, it turns out you should have read the news sign, things have changed around here. And there's also a reference to wearing masks. So the poem's linking the pandemic that unfortunately shows no signs of slowing down or ending.
It does not.
With this change of balance. Is that what you're trying to do, or you're trying to say something different here?
I definitely think that there's, that shift of, looking at what could happen when, there's a lack of people on the streets, what might happen if people aren't necessarily around anymore, what could happen if we weren't here. So I definitely think there is that kind of the shifting of the balance, and sort of, even though it's about birds, there's this kind of idea of what if you were to think of someone else other than yourself. What if you were to think not necessarily about birds, which is good in terms of, compassion, but what if you were to think about, fellow humans and kind of, the impact that we're having on them. So that was sort of where I was going with it, but it's also a lot of my poems, I feel, are, in terms of what is read into them, and I guess this is the same with a lot of poems, is that it is up for grabs. People can read whatever they want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if a poem is not a poem unless you can read something into it, I think.
Exactly.
And look, here I go. I'm going to go off on what I've read into it.
Yeah.
So are the birds in this poem a metaphor for all the things we can't outrun, like climate change, the exhaustion of the planet's resources, extinction events, whatever?
I mean, look, they're not that, especially when, there is that repetition of the phrase, is that simply just like instead of saying the birds, is it actually a list of other things? So no, look, I'm 100% here for that. I would neither confirm nor deny that interpretation.
All right. Let's move on. Next poem.
Alrighty. Oh gosh, another one where I have feelings about animals. Excellent.
Don't we all?
Oh, I love them so much. This one is called Visitors. Why do you talk about the possums that way? Only one visible, coat plump and brown plum, a wiry nest cuddled under outdoor plant stand, sphered in, curved branches, tethered twine, old man's beard, crumpled, clustered fairy lights, clutched and dragged from the garden. Because I don't know their gender, I say, or there could be two of them. I watch your furry breath belly swell and exhale. We all have to breathe, and maybe you have nowhere else to go. A snickering response. Well, aren't you just a goddamn warrior? Jumbled twigs shuffle and shutter pops. Your shiny black eye watching us. We've been too loud.
Yes, lots of play in this poem.
And definitely lots of metaphor. Humans too loud on this planet, quite frankly.
Well, I was going to come to that. I don't know if you saw last month's podcast with Steve Evans, but Steve had a poem about a possum,
yes,
where the possum's world intersected with the narrator's world. But here, there's not just an intersection, there's a dialogue, and a very funny dialogue at that. You must have enjoyed writing that.
I did. It's definitely based on not necessarily the dialogue, but the possum itself. Most definitely did live under my plant stand, and most definitely did get my fairy lights and put them in their nest.
Sounds more like a bowerbird than a possum.
I know, right? Yeah, very cute. Very frustrating, but adorable.
Yeah. So, and you've alluded to this already, we've been too loud. The sense I have of this poem is of intrusion, but not by the possums. And the conclusion, we've been too loud, points us to us as the visitors, not the possums. Which could be a metaphor. Here we go, talking about metaphors for the whole colonial enterprise in Australia, right? Visitors who overstayed their welcome and never left, and intruders who have never stopped being intruders. Is that?
Look, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, it's not just about, a possum intruding on, my, space, because at the end of the day, it's not mine. We are colonizers who never left, and the possums, were here first. And yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like often, as white people in so-called Australia, we are too loud. We're too, not just in terms of noise pollution, but in terms of everything. Like, we are continuously building, we are continuously taking over day after day. And yeah, it is definitely something that I sort of wanted to show sort of this kind of small space that the possum had built to kind of house themselves, versus this sort of more giant corporatized, capitalist, colonized world that we live in.
I mean, there's a dichotomy or corollary, I guess. If we're too loud, we're not listening.
Indeed. Yeah, exactly. And I think I don't think whenever the possum was here, it never really made much of a noise. So I think that's kind of interesting. It just made this kind of yuck, 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 yuck noise if I got too close. So yeah, I think if white people are too, if we're too loud, we're not listening, and we're not, we're not learning. We're not, out there educating ourselves. So yeah, this one's definitely on the surface level cute.
Yes.
On the lower levels, not very political.
Yes. And look, I mean, the role of the poet is to observe, and we observe ourselves and one another. We do this whether we're poets or not, but of course, poets have a special interest in doing that, and in being witness. But in all the poems you have read so far, human conduct is observed and not flatteringly by non-human senses, albeit through the human lens of your words. Are these poems asking us to stop and reflect more deeply about our interaction with the world?
Look, definitely, yeah. There's a lot of poems, I think, in this collection that kind of do that. And, I sort of want people to look at, what they're doing and, same as with that first poem, what they're not doing, what they could do more of. And it's not necessarily something that will happen when people read these poems, but it's hopefully would be a nice byproduct, when people do read them. I would really like to see more change in this world that is, I guess, more positive, and something that looks at the environment and looks at animals as, they're more our friends, and they're, I just want to see them not be extinct, essentially. It would be nice to live in a world in which, we were able to cohabitate more with animals and the environment. So yeah, hopefully that's something that is a takeaway for a lot of these poems in here.
Do you think every poem you write is political?
Oh, me or one as in like other people, I guess.
Well,
for me, probably. Oh no, look, some of them are just silly, but at the same, not in this book. But I say that, and I was thinking when I said the word silly, I was thinking, well, I've written some poems about this game called Animal Crossing that I really love playing. And I was like, oh, that's silly poetry, but no, all of those poems are also quite political. They're either about gender, they're about colonization, and they're about silly aspects of the game, but there's also that kind of like political level to them. So look, I'm sure there's some in here that have a little bit more whimsy. I think there's one about a cat that's probably not political, but I'd say probably 90% are in some way have a different have layers of messages, and definitely one of them is I guess, well, what are you doing, or what could you do more of, or in terms of a lot of the gender specific poems, they're about, I guess, telling other trans people that they're loved, and that they're valid. So there's definitely lots of political messages, I think, within my work.
I mean, the joy for a reader is to try and uncover all those levels.
Definitely.
We don't always succeed, and but that's part of the joy, is that you don't always succeed, and you're ferreting around the dark, and hopefully you find something, glimmers of light.
Exactly.
All right. Would you like to read us another one?
Yes.
I didn't think you'd say no.
Yeah. No. I was going to say, let's do like the last sort of more environment focused one, and then we can move on to the gender ones. But I really like this one because it is about, I'm surrounded by construction sites at the moment. And this poem's sort of about that, and it's called Not Unlike Love. It's something to do with impermanence, the flight, swift slice of limb from log, bone from branch, about the smallest snips it took to ground you. It's something not unlike possession, about fell from falling, freedom from free fall, the quick cleave of chainsaws, then Corellas screeching, treeless. If eviction's in moratorium, then does private equal public? And what might it mean to grow autonomy? In the hot bask of afternoon sun, I kneel to count your notches and tally your timeline. And you tell me, we could be happy here. And so we dig and turn, plant parsley and basil, chives and mint. We laugh at aphids, leaf hoppers, landlords and other pests. We knock down the gates and the for sale sign. We let the sun in.
Yeah, that's lovely. For me, this poem is immediately set up by the title, Not Unlike Love. And then the first line, it's something to do with impermanence. I mean, there's so much in those two lines put together, juxtaposed together. Can you elaborate a little bit on the relationship between the title and that first line and how that permeates the rest of the poem?
Yeah, I think the impermanence of, so there was these beautiful gum trees out the back, and they cut every single one down for construction. And it was something that was so incredibly permanent and something that, you know, brought me so much joy. And that incredible impermanence and knowing that anything could change at any moment was something that I think I'd forgotten perhaps when it happened. And so, yeah, I love that kind of, as you said, that juxtaposition where, you know, I talk about it not being unlike love because, you know, I did love those trees. And it was to do with impermanence. And I think that, you know, when we look at love, it's something, you know, it's always to do with perhaps, I guess, more traditionally romance or you know, loving family members. And for me, this was, you know, about loving a bunch of trees that I was deeply upset to lose, especially when, you know, they were home to so many beautiful birds. So yeah, those first two lines are definitely very sentimental.
Yeah, but I mean, the poem could have been all about grief, but it's not. It's about love, isn't it?
Absolutely, always. Yeah, it was something that I sort of look at that. I'm looking out there now at this sort of block of land. The trees have been cut down now for a number of years, and they haven't actually built anything out there. And I look at it, and I think of, you know, the beautiful potential for, you know, that space. And that kind of beautiful potential for a lot of those kind of spaces, you know, and the love that we could show to, you know, to basically just to the environment, but also to, you know, just green spaces like that.
But this is a hopeful poem. It's a joyous poem. I mean, it seems like it's a poem about finding a place in the world and feeling at home.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely to, you know, as I said, you know, plant and, you know, sow your seeds and let the sun in, you know, sort of really kind of, yeah, as the tree says, be happy here.
Yeah. I mean, despite the impermanence, there's something quite grounded in this poem. And I think partly it's to do with the attention to small things in the poem. And the implicit suggestion that immersion in an aggregation of small things might be all you need to be happy here.
I think so. Like it's one of those sort of, you know, I guess it's a mindfulness technique as well, where, you know, there's that idea of, you know, if you focus on the smaller things, if you know, engage with, you know, those more kind of habitual day-to-day activities, you know, like in this case, like planting parsley, basil, you know, you can be happy. So it definitely does kind of reflect those, yeah, those ideals.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to read another poem?
Yes, let's do a kind of turn in terms of theme. This one is called Somewhat Safe. At the airport, on different sides of the country, we're both ushered. Sir, ma'am, just a random test for explosives. I message you. It happened again. Same, you type. Do you think it was the tattoos? It was probably the skirt. In different stores, in different states, buying the same cheap blue hair dye, you get your bags checked. Ma'am, sir, just a random check, part of our store policy. You message me. You too? Nah, I type. Got me some cis-passing white privilege, baby. On quiet streets, we're walking home. Wind tickles the river, ripples cool air down my neck. Reminds me of rotating fans hemmed with ice trays in summer. In this moment, I'm happy, somewhat safe. You messaged me. Was just yelled at on the street again. Thought they were going to stop, get out of the car. Can I call you? My heart, shucked and floundering on the footpath. A car creeps down the unlit side street with headlights howling. You can always call me.
After reading your poems a few times, I realized that I had to pay special attention to your titles because they are often more than just signposts. Yeah. I've always thought of safety in binary terms, either or, either you're safe or you're unsafe. And the title here, Somewhat Safe, suggests a provisional, tenuous safety. And the poem itself, you make it clear that it is a momentary thing, something you can't take for granted, something you can't depend upon. Can you elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think in this poem, it, obviously reflects mostly, on being a trans person. And obviously I say this as someone who, as the poem says, has cis-passing white privilege, but for, a lot of trans women and a lot of trans women of colour, and, for a lot of marginalised people, that safety is something that, as you said, we don't, we can't take for granted. Every kind of, even within the home, safety is something that is, impermanent. Safety is something that, you can't bet on. And, that can be to do with, anything from, misgendering or dead naming, that kind of, or, verbal violence to, physical violence to harassment, and then you've got the, I guess, our rights, are often up for grabs by the government. It's something that, our safety and our personhood is seen as a debate, and that kind of makes you not only unsafe, but also, makes you feel quite unmoored, I guess. So yeah, safety is something that definitely is not, like gender, is definitely not binary.
Yeah. It's I mean, important for people to know that. And maybe this is the message in the poetry, is for people like me who probably made the assumption that safety was safety and unsafety was unsafety, but not so. And it's very important to share experiences with others who understand them, as you do in this poem, who have experienced something similar and can provide solidarity and support, even from the other side of the country. But it's important to share them with people who don't understand it as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think, community is one of those things that I really think is important, in the LGBT plus community. there is that, that solidarity, that, that knowledge that, you're not alone, which is so incredibly vital. But yeah, definitely, being able to sort of show people what your day-to-day life looks like, is something that, as you said, something that you didn't, sort of realize or didn't think of. And I think that, for me, I'm like, this poem, I read it and go, well, look, I great poem, if I do say so myself, but this is something that is regular, like, it's not
lived experience.
Yeah. And it's not something that I sort of go, well, that'll be shocking to the audience, or that will give them something new. But I forget that is not the case, and that, a lot of people, will read this or will read, perhaps the entire book itself, and, see things, from that perspective. And, that's one of the wonderful things about poetry and writing in general, really.
And this poem's also a homage to friendship. And about not facing things alone. How precarious do you feel when these kinds of experiences happen?
Oh, I mean, definitely, as I said, I feel unmoored. But I think, that knowledge that you're not alone, and that, I have an incredible privilege to have, a beautiful community, and a beautiful group of friends and loved ones. I can only hope that other people have that as well, so that then they, if and probably when they experience something like this, if they're trans, that they have that support as well. But no, it definitely doesn't feel good.
like an anchor from being unmoored, having those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you kind of get jolted out of, how you see yourself. And then, there's that kind of, how other people see you is projected on you. And you're suddenly, not just person, but also object to be yelled at, to be, confusing to the eye, etc. Yeah.
I mean, your poems, but despite their playfulness, they tackle some big things. I mean, this poem goes
heavy.
to that huge subject of discrimination. You could probably write a whole book on that alone. And at the root of every discrimination is an inability to accept the other, whether from fear or ideology or belief or just simple failure to understand. How do you feel in the face of that inability to accept you for who you are?
I don't know if I can swear on. Can I swear on this podcast? Stuff them. Like, honestly, I think that the more, this might sound sassy, but the more someone doesn't accept who I am and assumes that I am wrong, or assumes that my trans siblings are wrong, oh, look, it just fills me with more power. Like, I think it's something that it is incredibly depressing, and it's upsetting, and it's awful, and it absolutely shouldn't be happening. And people, should accept us for who we are. But if they don't, I'm not going to waste my time on them. I definitely, any of that kind of crap thrown at me just makes me more enthusiastic, I think, to write this kind of work. And it makes me more engaged with my community and helping the people that I love. It makes me, I don't necessarily want to change their mind. I just want to make things better for people like me. So yeah, that stuff them.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And you know, if they do accept me at the end of the day, that's great. You know, good stuff.
Yeah, and look,
Yeah, you never know what happens. People change.
You don't, and that's right.
Yeah.
There's a journey there, and
Yeah.
to affect change, any kind of change, we have to acknowledge what it is that must change, and to do that, we must make visible what perhaps isn't. So
yeah, and like, you know, their you know, inability to accept might just be, you know, a lack of understanding. They get that understanding, they realize, you know, something about their view of the world, perhaps about themselves. They change. It's a journey. In that case,
yeah,
I support that.
I mean, the first step is to bring something out into the open, and that's what this does. And I mean, I was just wondering, is that one of the objectives of your writing these poems, to bring them out in the open, the hope that they will affect change?
Yeah, I mean, definitely first and foremost, it's a book that is for, I guess, you know, my community, but definitely in terms of audience, I do hope that, you know, it does affect change, or people can read it and maybe, yeah, see themselves in the book, or get a greater understanding, or, you know, whatever the case may be. First and foremost, yeah, it is definitely for people like me, but it is absolutely, you know, something that, as the back says, you know, I'm holding out my hand, I'm offering people this kind of connection, and I just hope that they read it and learn from it and take that, you know, that away with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you like to read another one?
Yes, I was like, how much in terms of time? I think I was going to read like just go until we go. That's the spirit. This one is called Gender Marker. You fax the emailed, printed, scanned copy of the copy of the copy of the government form to the sun-cracked machine on the beach. The waves lap it up because they love repetition. Tiny hermit crabs tinker across square plastic edges, tickling the machine with their claws. It laughs, grey skin splitting in fissures, choking out faxes with guffaws. Papers strewn akimbo on the beach, where X marks the spot, X marks the X, marks the X, marks the X. In the end, it's all in the ocean. X's cruising waves like they own the joint. And maybe they do in the end. In the end, even the crabs slide out with the tide. Oh, and for context, for people who heard that, there's actually some old school ASCII art in this poem as well.
I don't know if I should say this, Rae, but your poems make me smile.
They absolutely should. I also, it comes back to that play. Like, I love to have that little bit of humor, even though things are, you know, there's that underpinning of, you know, serious, maybe more political level.
You know, writing humor in poetry is not that easy. I don't find it easy. So, you know, it's wonderful when it happens. I mean, the machine choking out faxes with guffaws, I just love it. So, look, good poetry, I think, asks questions of its readers, makes them think, gives them space in which to ponder, which this poem certainly does. One thing I love about poetry is its capacity to surprise. From the title of the poem to the last word, I had no idea where the poem was going until it got there. And I reckon if you gave this title to 100 poets and had them all write poems to the title, none of those poems would be like this one.
Oh, that's a great exercise.
Yes, let's do it. Put on the list of, you know, Poets Corner things to do.
Yeah.
Now, I know that poems are supposed to stand on their own, but I would love it if you'd give us some context for this poem, Rae, and tell us a bit about what prompted what you wanted this poem to say to its readers.
Yeah, look, in terms of I guess the gender marker itself, X is considered, you know, the gender marker for indeterminate gender or sex. it's often used as for non-binary people. So there's, M, F, and X that you can tick on a lot of forms, which is what I refer to. And especially when changing gender markers or changing names on forms, that is something that often involves a lot of process and a lot of sort of more outdated processes. I never had to fax anything when I did it. However, that's sort of like a callback to, how incredibly outdated kind of the system is, not only in terms of, the amount of paperwork you often have to do for a lot of this stuff, but also, that there's MF and X. Sometimes there's only M and F, and you kind of have to, just see what they pick for you. And, that's something that obviously the X is something that I played with the ASCII art as well.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of I think it might have been a strange little dream that I had about faxes being on a beach. I'm wondering if this is where that originally came from, because I wouldn't be surprised. That's where a lot of my strange ideas come from that. But, I guess the conclusion is sort of looking at how, at the end of the day, what does it really matter? All these government forms can, be either, incredibly wonderful, if you are able to get the right gender marker. If you're not able to, they don't tell you who you are. They don't define you. And so, even in the end, you're still who you are, and those forms both matter and don't matter. So that's kind of the context.
Yeah. So just looking at a little bit of a technique thing, the use of repetition in poetry is a technique that can be very effective, or that can be overcooked and kill a poem. So you've got to be careful. I think it works beautifully here. Can you tell us a bit about what you had in mind when you used the repetition in this poem?
Definitely, it was sort of to highlight that kind of how repetitious it is to go through that kind of process of like changing name, changing gender marker, a lot of things like that does involve another form, another person you have to call, another place you have to visit, this, and it's incredibly repetitious. So that was sort of my hope that kind of highlighted that, and that it was engaging, but it also sort of showed the reader that there is this kind of monotony to the process, and same as sort of that the waves lapping, because they love repetition.
Yeah, well,
it was also a little bit there.
I was going to come to the waves.
Okay, yeah.
I'm interested in how you've connected the copies and the repetitions and the X's marking the spot to the ocean and the waves and the tide. Apart from repetition, there is something resolute and weighty and inexorable about the ocean and waves and the tide. Is that what you're saying about gender markers too, that they're hard to shift?
Yeah, they're definitely hard to shift, I guess, in terms of like a bureaucracy kind of way, in terms of how you feel within yourself. There's something that is permanent and like waves, and then there's also that kind of X marks the spot idea of buried treasure, and that idea of discovery and sort of knowing who you are, discovering who you are, maybe kind of digging through the sand to get there.
So, in a way, do you feel like you're swimming against the tide?
Oh, gosh, yes. A lot of the time, for many different reasons. But yes, definitely. And especially in terms of, changing gender markers, changing names, definitely something that can be very much, feel like swimming against the tide. And, it's often... the places that you'd least expect where it's hard to do those things. It'll be like your phone bill or something where they'll be like, oh no, sorry, like we don't have, we only have male or female here. And oh, sorry, we only have Mr. and Mrs. It's, and that's another, I guess, thing in terms of the X is MX is the sort of title that is often taken by non-binary people as a gender neutral title. Also doctor. I often use doctor, even though I don't have a doctorate, if they don't have another option. Dr. White.
Well, Doctor, have you got another poem for us?
Look, maybe one day I will have a doctorate. Probably not. Alrighty. This one is, I've got something to say. Will I always be scowling, cowering up tops of trees under stars, slumping my shoulders? Will I always be media frenzied and flung under palatable rainbow buses? Will I always be a warning, a cautionary tale to you? i.e., keep the kids away from that one. A genderqueer costs an arm and a leg and hormones to upkeep. Don't buy it, don't engage. Let sleeping dogs lie to me like someone you don't want to hurt. When everything in your life is sturdy statements, why am I the question? Why do I ask, can you love me as I am? Rather that you should be happy to love me in sickness and amidst my unhealthy eating habits. Thus, I have timidly written, please plead with me your case of shame at my buffet of sins, because could I not be your blessing, cloaked as that baby you once assigned and held?
I don't think anyone could think after reading this that you don't have anything to say, Rae. Great title.
Also, thank you. It's a reference to Alex the Astronaut's song Not Worth Hiding, which has lyrics throughout that is, sort of very affirming. And the one lyric that has a question is about, if you love them as a daughter, could you love them as a son? And it's a question. And I thought that was quite interesting that trans people are still always the question. So that was sort of what inspired this.
Yeah.
Little poem.
in terms of having something to say, I like to ask this of everybody, but I can't usually. But how did you come to say it through poetry?
Oh, interesting. Look, I didn't. Just this poem, or just in general, my poetic journey.
Yeah,
in
just
general. Yeah. Look, poetry was something that I never thought that I would be good at. I went to uni and studied writing, and then I just assumed that I didn't have anything to say, basically, and I didn't write for 10 years. And then I started reading poetry that was by, fellow queer and trans people, and I decided that I was going to have my first poem, published, I think by 30. And so I did that. And then I entered the Shapcott. And it's sort of been all uphill from there. But I think in terms of the reason for poetry was that I was able to sort of describe things so incredibly succinctly, but at the same time, layered in metaphor. And I was able to kind of, condense all of my feelings and all of my words into something a little bit smaller and a little bit more contained, and definitely, just as impactful. But yeah, poetry is, I think, no matter what I write something, no matter what I write, even if it's a short story or whatever, it's always going to be, in some respect, poetry.
Well, I'm glad you found your way to it.
Me too.
I want to ask you about acceptance. because this poem talks about it, I think. I feel as if acceptance should be a given, obviously, but it so often isn't. And this poem, in a way, is a plea for acceptance. So it must be hard to have to plea for something which should be a given. How hard is it for transgender people to find and experience acceptance? And is it a quest that never ends?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a quest that never ends. It's kind of like coming out. It's always happening. I feel like not necessarily every day, but every week. And yeah, look, it does feel kind of like kind of like the main quest of your life often. You have like these, if your life is a game, you have these side quests that are like, writing poetry and going to the grocery store. But like, it feels like sometimes that main quest is, acceptance from others. And I think, it is hard to, if you are unable to, be accepted by people, especially people who you love, or who you thought loved you, or who are trying to love you as you are, it can be hard to accept yourself, which is sort of, I guess, the main, that's the important thing, is accepting who you are, and, accepting yourself and your gender. But that can be so incredibly difficult when, you have people, telling you something to the contrary. So no, it's definitely an ongoing good time. I would say that I'm very privileged, and a lot of my life is not, it is full of acceptance and full of trans euphoria and stuff, and gender euphoria. It's not, there's people that have a lot less privilege than me. So
I mean, the question you just alluded to, the question of self-acceptance, that was going to be
that was the next one. Yeah.
Given societal norms and attitudes and the pressures that are brought to bear because of them, I mean, I think everybody at some stage, for some reason, might struggle with self-acceptance. It's not a sort of, it's a kind of universal theme. But how hard is it in this context to get there?
Look, it's something that I think for me, once I got there, I kind of forgot a lot of how tricky the journey was. So seeing, loved ones of mine, going through it now, it is incredibly hard, to sort of, especially, not necessarily all the time do trans people find that their body, is sort of in contrast to how they see themselves, but that can be something that's, difficult when it comes to acceptance of the self, dysphoria. And yeah, look, it is something that's incredibly hard, especially because, in terms of, like, I guess going back to poetry and then going back to language, is that, we sort of, even though trans people have been around forever, the language that we have now is often, hidden. It's probably more in the media now than it was when I came out, but it's something that, we've often not had. Like, I think the word genderqueer and the word non-binary is something that I don't remember when I was younger.
No, I don't.
And I wish I dang well had known about it.
Yeah.
So, like, it's incredibly hard to find yourself when you can't even find the correct words. So I think that's, a good thing about, currently, we have so many beautiful words, to describe ourselves, and so many, fellow trans advocates and, visibility, for better or worse.
Getting back to the poem.
I forgot what I read now.
I love how you turn a question into a question when you write, when everything else in your life is sturdy statements. Why am I the question? Have you found the answer to that question?
I think think people have a very solid idea of who you are. And when you tell them that you're not who when you tell them that, you know, you question their sturdy statement of you, you bring into question not only yourself and everything you've sort of told them, but perhaps also their view of the world and their view of gender. So, yeah, I think that's how I would answer that.
It's big. And can you elaborate? I might have misread it or read something else into it, but can you elaborate on your use of the word assigned in the last line of this poem?
Oh, yeah. So in terms of assigned at birth, that's sort of the terminology used currently. You know, it's probably changing or already changed perhaps, but it's the term used for the, you know, the gender assigned at birth for someone. So often, you know, there's a term used, you know, AFAB or AMAB, which is assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of looking at that, you know, kind of, even though I was, you know, or even though in this, you know, poem, the baby was a blessing that was once assigned, in this case, as the wrong gender, and, you know, held and loved, you know, can that, you know, baby be, you know, can the I in this poem plead acceptance, which is, as you said, a rough time.
All right, you have got one more poem for us.
I do. And I feel terrible. I feel like we've gone super over time, but I really appreciate your yeah, your time, and thanks for
learning,
everyone.
Rae, I'm learning.
You're learning.
I'm learning. Wonderful.
And look, and hopefully, you know, everyone listening will as well. Yeah, it's been awesome. All right, this one's one of my favorites. It's called Rainbow Confetti Pixels. Coming out as non-binary is like yelling into a void, but the void has disappeared and been replaced by change rooms in Target. And they're not even echoey enough to surround sound your voice so you can yell, "Oi, I'm neither of these, mate." Instead, they're just small stalls getting smaller and playing the same 80s and 90s hits on repeat every damn time. You're ushered and tense, rinse, repeat. You could rebel, but you don't. You enter the change room, but it's actually a toilet cubicle. Because at the end of the day, being trans is all about fucking lose, am I right? Coming out as non-binary is you staring big-eyed at the toilet who's flapping their lid saying, "Feed me," kind of like that 80s show, The Trapdoor. Because all trans kids grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and never aged. And none of them can be older or younger than me, because it's all just a fad, like butterfly clips and Tamagotchis. Am I right? But they're back. Tamagotchis. You can feed them and clean their poop just like you could back in the day. Because back in my day, I was still searching the mobile library shelves for books and words that described who I was. Because coming out as non-binary is a whole goddamn lifelong process. Like, step 1, brush the poop of your binary existence out the door with a pixelated broom. Step 2, replace the poop with butterfly clips in all different colors, mirroring your bedroom's purposefully rainbow bookshelf. Step 3, scatter hundreds and thousands like rainbow confetti pixels in the air. Step 4, yell, "Just fuck off, mate," to the demanding toilet binarists and their trans trender theories. Because today's trans trend is not feeding the trapdoor, all those monsters. Today's trans trend is feeding yourself love and goodness. Today's trans trend is believing you are non-binary enough, no matter what the monsters say. Today's trans truth is that we've always been here. Hundreds and thousands of years of us existing and echoing in surround sound pixel-filled skies, writing our words and stories into the historic void, coming out on repeat, rinse, repeat, rebel, repeat, every damn time, but never, ever disappearing.
Thank you.
I love that one so
Thank
much.
you for this one. What a great way to great way to finish this this podcast. Very uplifting poem. Well, we've talked a bit about acceptance and identity. Huge themes.
It's been a wild ride. I love it.
A wild ride. There's so much going on in your poems, Rae. I think they are in part a shout out to the void, a plea for acceptance, a defiant statement of being exactly who you are. But they're more than that. They're expressing vulnerability. They're disclosing experience on an emotional level. They're informing and educating and explaining. And you elucidate that so vividly in this last stanza of this poem. We're beginning with the line, today's trans truth is that we've always been here. And it's such an important line because I don't think everyone understands that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, it's one of my, I guess, aims is to sort of be writing that history and sort of, everything that's been, we've been erased so very often. I kind of want to, alongside all my fellow trans writers, be making that kind of mark so that there isn't that historic void.
Yeah. And what you're doing is making visible what has for so long not been very visible.
Yeah.
Shining a light maybe on the invisible ink so that writing has become apparent. I don't know.
It's like, that's a poem.
Yeah, there you go. Go off and write it.
Done.
So I want to come back finally, just to go all the way around to your theme of unruly poems, ones that defy convention through structural language and themes. Is there anything you would shirk in your poetry? Anything that might be too unruly for you?
Oh, too unruly. Nah. I mean, some poems that I look back on sometimes, like maybe in Milk Teeth, I go, oh, look, I could have done that better, but it's more that I could have made it more unruly. But I think, I was at a certain stage and I was experimenting, but I'm like, oh, I could have experimented with that more, but no, look, I think all these poems can handle themselves, and I say that as someone who kind of, I think that poems, when they are on the page, they are almost, I guess they are almost like their own agents. I feel, once I've kind of put them on the page and once they've been printed, like especially some of the more unruly ones that sort of play with visual form and stuff, they are almost doing their own thing, and they're taking up their own space. So
yep, they're out.
No, I think they're out in the world. Oh God, I know. It's terrifying. Whenever I see my book somewhere, I'm like shocked.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about the theme?
Oh no, look, I think, I'd say for my own writing, I think we've said, quite a lot, but, I think in terms of poetry that is unruly, if there is anyone, watching who, especially if you're, from a marginalized community, I reckon, if you're worried that poetry is not for you, or you're worried that it's something that's, too conventional or whatever, or too strict in its form, absolutely do not worry, go for it. Please write poetry, because, you too can write something unruly and playful and odd, and it can be for you, it can be for other people, you can get it printed. Like, I think, my aims for this book are, to maybe to educate and to cater to, my beautiful trans people, but also to sort of encourage other people to write poetry. Like, have a go. It's incredibly fun.
It is fun. It is great fun.
So be unruly, be ungovernable.
It's been great fun having you on the podcast.
Thank
Rae.
you so
Thank
much.
you so much for sharing poems and insights on that wonderful theme that you came up really quickly with. Unruly poems, ones that defy convention through structural language and themes. Details of Rae's books will be posted with this podcast. And we will return next month in August with Scott Patrick Mitchell on the theme of addiction and recovery. See you then.